Kristen from Maybe a Better One Knits, here today to talk to you about fall knitting trends. When I say knitting trends, I mean what we are seeing coming out in knitting patterns that have been dropping recently for fall and I guess winter as well. We don't differentiate too much between fall and winter here in the knitting world. So I just wanted to talk about some of the things that we are seeing, share a few patterns for these trends, and just kind of share my thoughts and get your feedback as well. So be sure to leave comments, whether you love them or hate them, about these 6 trends that I'm going to talk to you about today. So in general, I don't get too fussed about knitting pattern trends because it takes me so long to finish things that by the time that I might jump on a bandwagon, it has like already moved on. But trends are definitely a thing that happens in knitting patterns, and some of them do stick around a little bit longer than others. So whether you are consider yourself a trendy person or not, it's always interesting to kind of see what's going on in your niche, your hobby, your industry perhaps, and put some thought into whether that's something you are interested in or not. All right, so without further ado, let's jump in and start talking about these 6 trends that I have identified in knitting patterns, knitting designs, knitting Instagram, in the knitting world for fall, or if you're on the other side of the equator, spring 2024. The first one, I think, it's been coming up for a while. It started creeping in a little bit a couple years ago, but really we're just seeing it everywhere this fall, and that is mosaic knitting. So mosaic knitting is basically a form of color work that is created rather than carrying 2 yarns along a row and alternating between yarns. You will knit a set of stitches with a particular yarn and slip all the stitches that you're not knitting with that yarn. And then on the next pass, you will go through and knit the slipped stitches with the other yarn and slip the stitches that you knit in the previous row. So I think sometimes people get thrown off by the term mosaic knitting, which sounds like, I don't know, some big scary thing, but it is really just different forms of slipping stitches to create color work patterns, or to create color designs in your knitwear. So we've been seeing this everywhere. Probably the biggest one that you're familiar with more recently is the series of pressed flower designs by Amy. I don't know if it's Christopher's or Christophers. So the pressed flower cardigan, I believe there's a pullover, there's definitely a shawl, I think there might be a hat. So I'll pop the cardigan in here just so you can see. So you've got, and I believe hers is created by using a solid main color and then a gradient or variegated, probably spin cycle, contrast color. And this kind of checkered cross design is created, as I said, by slipping stitches, only working with 1 color per row, and slipping all the stitches that you're not using that color for. So as I said, this was released a year or 2 ago, I think, and since then we've just been seeing more and more of the mosaic stuff, and since fall hit, just a ton of patterns have come out. And if you are familiar with Young Folk Knits over here on YouTube as well, I'm sure you are. She is actually hosting a mosaic knitting knit-along this fall for various mosaic knitting patterns. So as I said, the Pressed Flowers series of patterns has probably gotten the most notice recently in the past couple of years, but if you go onto Ravelry, you can filter your search by, what's it called? Color work techniques, and choose mosaic, and you'll see a bunch of stuff pop up. So earlier this week, I believe, Andrea Mallory released her latest pattern, which is called Hey Sailor. That's another mosaic knit. And it's certainly not just sweaters. It is being used everywhere. Shawls, hats. I think You're gonna see it a lot, especially in shawls, because trying to do stranded knitting flat is horrible. And mosaic knitting is a nice way to create kind of colorful patterns without having to purl in stranded color work, which we can all agree is terrible. So lots of mosaic knitting patterns have been popping up recently. I don't know how I feel. Like, I really like the pressed flowers cardigan. That is on my list. I would love to make it someday. I actually, I was kind of thinking about getting the yarn to participate in that knit along, but I know I have so many whips and I got so much other stuff that I want to do. So I do like that one, but overall, I'm not a huge fan of all over bright, colorful designs that are a lot of times the result of mosaic knitting. That's just a personal preference. It has nothing to do with anything really. I just don't tend to do like really I just don't tend to wear a lot of really colorful stuff, but and I think that does tend to be the kind of the result of the mosaic knitting a lot. Obviously you can go like lower contrast. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be so bright and colorful, but that does seem to be a lot of the vibe with it. So my personal opinion on the mosaic knitting, I like the technique. As I said, I've used it in small parts of a few of my designs. I like the convenience of being able to make those colorful patterns without the difficulties of stranded color work flat, but in general, it's probably not my favorite. I sincerely doubt, unless I go ahead, because I actually picked out the yarn for the pressed flowers cardigan. Unless I bite the bullet and actually order that, I don't see myself jumping on the mosaic colorwork trend this fall, but it is definitely out there, and there is some really cute stuff available if that is something that you are interested in. So transitioning from that into my next trend, because a lot of times it is a mosaic technique that is used to create it, and that is the quilt star motif that is suddenly everywhere. So last year, it looks like Katrin Seeberger, okay, released the heirloom quilt cardigan. And when I saw this, I was like, that's pretty cute. I don't know if I would personally wear this. I might if I could maybe do it some low contrast, but I really like the idea. So you're kind of knitting these, quilt blocks and seaming them together to make this cardigan. But again, this is flat stranded color work, so the chances of me ever doing this are basically zero. But it is cute. But since this pattern was released, all of a sudden these like quilt block, quilt stars are everywhere. Most recently, Andrea Mallory did her framed sweater, quilt stars. Amy Christopher's poly cardigan. These are quilt stars created with mosaic knitting. I believe Andrea Mallory's version is stranded color work. Yeah, because I think there's steeking involved, as I recall looking at it. So the poly cardigan is mosaic. Okay, so no, Andrea Mallory's does not have you steek. It has you do color work flat. But I believe I saw somebody on Instagram who was like, screw that, I'm steeking it. So yeah, hers is stranded color work. But again, this kind of very quilt star reminiscent, quilt block star reminiscent pattern. I saw it on a pair of socks on Instagram recently. Amy Christopher's has the Hesper shawl, which is a year old, but still features that sort of star motif. Maybe that's where it all started. I don't know. But suddenly that very geometric star, very much based on those traditional quilt blocks, is suddenly everywhere in knitting. I've definitely seen it on a hat recently somewhere on Instagram. As I said, I saw it on socks. We've got several patterns that have that motif in sweater cardigan form. It's everywhere. As I said, I really liked the original. That quilt block cardigan, but now I think it's a little bit overkill. I am, in general, kind of geometric shapes are not really my thing, but especially with it, like it's everywhere, and I think it's getting overdone. So personally, this is not a trend that I am on board with. I think it's too much everywhere, and it's kind of getting oversaturated. But if you really like that motif, the good news is that there are a lot of patterns out there. You've got a lot of options that are both stranded colorwork and mosaic knitting available to you this fall, if that is your thing. All right, the next thing I think we are seeing a lot of, and I will say right off the bat, I'm a big fan of this trend, is the slipovers, the sweater vests. And I believe this was also the case last fall, and now we're getting even more of them, and I personally love it. So a slipover is apparently what we're calling them now. We used to call them a sweater vest, and I don't know, somebody told me once that because vest means something different in American English and British English. So like what we call a vest, British people call a waistcoat, and what they call a vest is like a men's, like a wife beater. So now we're calling it a slipover, which I suppose does make more sense because it's meant to go over your clothes. And we are seeing lots of them, and they're all lovely, and I just love them. What I really like about this trend is that I think it's kind of acknowledging a little bit that we don't, especially as we get into August, we're like, okay, fall's coming, time for sweaters. But the vast majority of us don't just jump from summer to sweater weather. You have a period in late September, October, even into early November, where it really is not cold enough for sweaters. And so the slipover is really giving you a chance to get into the knitting, get into the fall mood, but to create something you're actually going to be able to wear in that interim period where, it is cool, but it's not sweater cool. It's maybe a light removable layer cool. So slipovers are everywhere. I adore them. I have a whole bunch hearted and queued on Ravelry. So I will show you one that I have actually cast on. This is the Lulu slipover. This is a pattern by Petite Knit. I've never knit a Petite Knit pattern before, so this one's my first one. This is adorable. I love the high collar on this, but there are just so many out there, and I will tell you that I just translated a pattern for Mochi Knits of a really adorable sweater vest, slipover, whatever you want to call it. It has a button front, and it's absolutely gorgeous. So definitely keep your eyes peeled for that. I believe it is currently in testing. So slipovers are everywhere. Lots of cute patterns out there. So I did want to show another one that I really like. So the other one that I really liked, the slipover, is the Edgar slipover. This is a pattern by Johanna Gerich that looks like she did in collaboration with Hobby Yarn, and I really like the lines on this. I think this is really cute. It's going to be easy to layer, which is obviously what you want from a slipover, because there's not a whole lot going on here, but it's also not just a plain old stockinette, which you might get kind of bored with. Slipovers, I am a definite yes for the slipover trend. The next one is something that is always on trend for me personally, but I think had seen a little bit less interest in recent years and now is making more of a comeback, is the all over cabled, especially sweaters. So for a while, I think we've really been seeing a move toward simpler shapes, simpler designs, things that are going to work up quickly, and less interest in these all over cable garments that, they take some time they take some time to get done. Even if you were cabling without a cable needle, cables are not necessarily fast. And the nature of some of these patterns is that they end up being seamed. They are not necessarily, a simple top down and we're done construction. So I think we had seen that a lot of this cabling disappearing, and now I feel like it is making a comeback. I have seen quite a few all over cable designs. Everybody loves Sari Nordland. She did the book club cardigan recently. Lots of delightful cables here. She has another one somewhere on this list that's also full of cables. Yarn company that focuses a lot on cable designs is Hudson and West. A lot of really beautiful all over cable pullovers coming from them. And one of the, I believe, women who owns Hudson and West, Megan Babin, she is a huge cable sweater designer, and she recently released this one, which is called a Hammersmith. Oh, just beautiful, all over cables, cables everywhere. I absolutely love this. So I am happy to see a return to more of these cabled, textured sweaters. I think they are beautiful. I'm glad we are seeing more of them. As I said, they aren't as simple and straightforward as some of the sort of very basic stockinette sweaters we've been seeing recently. So they're not going to knit up as quickly. They may be a little more fiddly to construct, but they're just so gorgeous. They're absolutely stunning. The only other thing to remember with cabled sweaters is that they do tend to eat up more yarn. So crossing all those stitches, if you've got an all over cable motif, probably going to use more yarn than a plain sweater of the same size. That is just the nature of them. But thumbs up from me for the all over cables, cables everywhere. I love it. All right, the next trend is definitely something we are seeing not just in sweaters, but on basically everything, which is either very large and bold or very geometric colorwork designs. So as you know, in the past, the circular yokes with the very sort of dainty stranded patterns, the little like fleur-de-lis and the small little lice stitches, and they're still there, but I'm seeing a lot more kind of big patterns, like big flowers and big animals. So, and also very geometric inspired design. So instead of like little flowers and leaves and things, I'm seeing more like bold geometric shapes, triangles, squares, very linear stuff. So a couple years ago, Kate Hunter released this pattern, but it has suddenly become very popular, which is called Halibut. And it is a design with fish. It's lots of big fish. A very big, bold design there. This lovely, and this was released earlier this year, Polina pullover. These big, not these tiny little flowers, these great big shapes that are just like overwhelming the whole sweater. So that, is in terms of those big, bold designs. And then some more like kind of geometric looking patterns as well. I don't know how this is pronounced. This is the Ace sweater, perhaps. So you can see we've got very sort of fractal-like pattern here. The sole blouse, this is a really interesting sort of arranged in the stripes and very bold, popping out from the fabric, but also it's very geometric. And then we have this one. This is Adelise or Adelis, I don't know, from Audrey Borrego. This one was just released. You can see again, this is not the cute, dainty little ferrule. This is very bold and very more geometric, inspired here. Personally, this is not my style, and I'm not a big color work person in general. Color work tends to be worked on a circular yoke. Circular yoke sweaters don't fit me particularly well. And when I do go for patterning, I don't really like geometric stuff, and I don't really like big, bold stuff. I like more subtle stuff. So personally, I am not on board with this trend. But that said, you can see how much work goes into creating these, and some of these are really cute, even if they're not my personal style. And I think it's kind of nice to see, something new taking hold in the area of color work. So for the last couple of years, I think the colorwork scene has kind of been dominated by florals, by circular yokes, leaf motifs, and now we're seeing something just a little bit different. which I think is a nice change. So not for me personally, but still like it in terms of just appreciating the artistry that goes into it. All right, and our last trend is, and I think this might be born a little bit out of the push towards sort of the more basic, mostly stockinette, pullovers and cardigans and things, is that I'm seeing a lot more care being taken in the finishing techniques for patterns. And I think perhaps that is because if you're just making kind of a basic stockinette sweater, there's not a lot going on, but the finishing details can really elevate an otherwise very plain pattern. All right, so I'm not necessarily in this case referring to any specific patterns, it's just a trend overall in patterns. I just think we're seeing a little bit more attention to detail with the finishing. So as opposed to just a simple ribbed button band, we're seeing more double knit button bands. Instead of a simple bind off, we're seeing, some neat tubular bind offs, Italian sewn bind offs, folded over collars on sweaters, things like that. And I think that it's really nice. I think, personally, I love this. And in general, I think it, for a lot of designs, really takes something from looking more homemade to looking more handmade. So it just looks a little bit more professional, a little bit tidier. But it's also very subjective. If none of those things are important to you, then you don't have to bother with them. But if you want something that looks just a little bit more polished, I think some of these patterns giving you extra attention to detail with those finishing techniques is really elevating some simpler pieces, but also some other generally more involved pieces that if you put all this work into something that's lots of cables or color work or whatever, you don't want to scrimp on the details at the end. And so I think some of this neater, tidier finishing really looks nice, really gives things a nice finishing touch at the end. So personally, I am an absolute fan of that. I can't say that I always do it. Sometimes I just want to get my sweater done and I don't want to take the time to do a tubular bind off, or knit the collar twice as long because I got to fold it over and seam it. Those things do take extra time, and depending on what I'm going to be using, if it's just a sweater I'm never intending to take out of the house, it's just something just kind of wear around the house, do I need to put that effort in? Sometimes we make that choice, but overall I am a big fan of that. I think it really just elevates the knitting a little bit, and I personally really like it. All right, so those are my 6 trends for knitting patterns this fall. I would love to hear your thoughts. Do you love them? Do you hate them? Do you have a love-hate relationship with some of them? Definitely leave a comment below and let me know. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. I hope you found it interesting or informative. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. New videos every Saturday about knitting. If you are looking for me on social media, you can find me on Instagram and Ravelry as Mayday Padawana. And I will see you next time.